Okay, it's showtime. Hi, folks. So, why is understanding long term care so important? To completely wrap your head around the answer to that question, you first have to understand what the state of affairs is in the US when it comes to long term care and where that may be leading us. Did you know that Medicaid, which is a joint health program for low income individuals that is funded jointly by our federal and state governments, spent approximately $138.9 billion on long term care services in 2021, which was actually an increase of around $9.9 billion since 2020? And that California, New York, and Pennsylvania were the states with the highest long term care expenditures. Also, since Medicaid accounted for roughly 7.28% or $728 billion of all federal outlays in 2021, that means that long term care makes up roughly 20% of the federal Medicaid budget, and most likely a larger percentage of each state's Medicaid budget as well. Since our federal government covers up to 60% of all nursing home residents and roughly 31% of all costs for long term care services and support in each state. So, where is this all leading to? Well, some states have found that the cost of long term care has gotten to be so burdensome on state budgets that they've actually created a new tax fund. In fact, in Washington state, legislators approved a public long term care insurance program in 2019 that will be paid for by an annual payroll surcharge of 0.58% of each worker's wages. In return for this tax, each person who paid in would be eligible for a public long-term care insurance benefit of up to $36,500 per year, which will begin in 2025. However, there was one caveat that they made at the last minute, a change to the law which stated that the only way that residents could opt out of having to pay this tax is if they purchased private long-term care coverage by November 1st, 2021. Also, according to an article dated November 1st, 2021 on the long-term care news website, there are currently 12 other states that are considering implementing a long-term care tax very similar to the one that was passed and went into effect in January 2022 in Washington state. Now, currently PA is, fortunately for us, not on that list, but New Jersey is, and so is California, Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. But you can certainly see how it's a possibility for all of us to have to seriously consider private long-term coverage in the not too distant future. And all of this is not even to mention that the Medicaid income and asset rules, if you're in need of public long-term care coverage, are laid out in a way that could cause hardship to your spouse and your heirs under certain circumstances, which we'll discuss in detail in a minute. But before we do that, I want to thank each of you for attending our webinar today. Our topic is understanding long-term care. My name is Brian Dougherty of PLC Financial Solutions, and I'm your host for this workshop today. And unfortunately, my wonderful, beautiful partner in business and life, Rachel Dougherty, is not going to be able to be our moderator for it, as she usually is, because she had some other business obligations he had to attend to. So you're stuck with me as the moderator for it as well, which means that I'll be also handling all the comments and the questions as we move along. With that said, I must tell you that I am still super excited to be presenting this topic to you today again, because long-term care has been of special interest to us at PLC Financial Solutions, because so many retirement plans can and have been derailed as a result of catastrophic long-term care events, which to me makes it very important that we continually discuss why that is and how it can be mitigated, if not completely avoided. But before we get started, let's take care of some general housekeeping first. First, if the screen's not big enough for you, you can click on the View Options drop down at the top right of the screen to make it larger. Also, you'll see that there are two boxes at the bottom of your screen, one called Chat, and it's for your comments, and another is called Q&A, and that's for your questions. Please use them accordingly, and I will do my best to respond to them in kind. Next, I'm sure that many of you have questions about the material we'll be covering today, but since we have a good bit of material to cover and only an hour or so to cover it, I'm going to ask you to put your comments and questions in those boxes below, or you can even email them to me at info@plcfs.com if that's easier for you. And at the end, we will be staying for some extra time to cover as many of them as possible. However, if we don't cover yours, I'd be happy to answer it by either email or even a 15-minute Q&A phone call scheduled for another time. And I'll be posting a link for you to do that before we end today. Next thing, this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to everyone who is attending. So don't worry about missing anything. You'll have plenty of time to check it all out again at your convenience. Also, because we want to make sure that you're all paying attention, and that because we would like you to have some fun as well, before we answer any questions, we have a 6-question quiz for you at the end, as always. And the first person to answer each question correctly inside the comment box will win a $10 gift card for each question answered to a store of their choice. So make sure you have your handy dandy notebook right next to you so you can jot down some brief notes related to some special bullet points that I will point out as we go along. Finally, it's my obligation as a financial advisor and a fiduciary to inform you of our RIA's disclaimer statement, which is that our investment advisory services are offered through Fusion Capital Management, an SEC-registered investment advisor, and we only transact business in states where we are properly registered or are excluded or exempted from registration requirements. SEC registration is not an endorsement of the firm by the commission and does not mean that our advisors have attained a specific level of skill or ability. And most importantly, all investment strategies and have a potential for profit or loss. So now that we got that out of the way, I have one for you as usual. Did you hear about the 2 people that stole a calendar? They each got 6 months. Found that one today on the internet. Yes, I'm going to keep the day job as always. All right. So, how likely are you to need long-term care? Well, even though it can vary over time dramatically and continues to change over time, here are some statistics to consider. Bullet point one, take out those handy dandy notebooks, write this down. Someone turning 65 today has almost a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care services and support in their remaining years. A 70% chance. 53% of women and 47% of men will need long-term care in their lifetimes. Women need care longer, approximately 3.7 years, and men roughly 2.2 years. While 1/3 of today's 65-year-olds may never need long-term care support, 20% will need it for longer than 5 years. So, if I told you that you had a 70% chance of your car breaking down on a trip, how likely would you be to take precautions to avoid it? That's why you're here today, I'm sure. All right, let's break down some different types of long-term care services and look at some facts related to them as well. First is home-based care. Now, homemaker services, nationally, the median daily rate charged by a non-certified but licensed home care agency for homemaker services is $141 a day. This includes housekeeping, cooking, and running errands. And then there is, which also is part of home-based care, there is home health aid services. Nationally, the median daily rate charged by a non-certified but licensed home care provider for home health aid services is $144 a day. Healthcare aides provide assistance with activities of daily living, aka those ADLs, that are not medical care. And then there's also community-based care, and that consists of adult day health care. Nationally, the median daily rate charged for adult day health care, which provides therapeutic, social, and other support services in a community-based setting, is $75 a day. Now, facility-based care, first type is assisted living facilities. And nationally, the monthly median rate for a private one-bedroom unit in an assisted living facility is $4,050 a month, which is an average annual cost of about $48,600. And these rates also exclude one-time community entrance fees. Bullet point two, come on now, get the notebooks out, write this down. Nursing homes, nationally, the median annual rate for a single occupant private room is $102,200 per year. It's $102,200 per year, or $8,517 per month. Write that down. The median annual rate for a single occupant private room in a nursing home is $102,200 per year, or $8,517 per month. Now, the median annual rate for a semi-private room is $90,155 per year, or $7,513 per month. It's not much off of the cost of a single private room. Considering that the average length of stay in a nursing home is 2.5 years, the total cost for an average stay today would be about $225,000 or to $255,000. That's a lot of money. For many, this expense could easily consume a lifetime of savings. Others may not be able to cover the cost at all. Also, the Genware study that provides these statistics also track the historical trends of these costs, which in general tend to increase each year. Based on these historical trends, it's possible that the cost of the most expensive levels of long-term care in 15 years or so will be roughly 1.5 times what they are today. All right. So if someone who is in need of long-term care services today is either unconfident that they will be able to afford the cost of long-term care, or originally thought that they could, but starts to think that they are going to run out of money as a result of their needs, then they're going to need to file a claim with Medicaid. And then they'll need to start playing by Medicaid's rules. And the first rule that most people will be introduced to is called the spend down rule. The spend down rule. And there are two main clauses in their rules for spend down. Medicaid long-term spend down rule clause 1 actually has 2 parts to it, and they go like this. Part 1, since Medicaid is the largest public source of funding for long-term care in the United States and is funded and administered through federal and state efforts, contrary to many people's beliefs, when it comes to long-term care, Medicaid is not available to everyone who needs long-term care services. It's available only to certain low-income individuals and families who fit into particular eligibility groups. Those who apply to Medicaid for payment of long-term care services must meet both the financial and functional eligibility criteria to qualify. The financial criteria to qualify often requires recipients to spend down their assets to become what Medicaid considers to be sufficiently needy. Now, part 2 does, however, mention that there are rules that allow preserving some assets for healthy spouses to prevent spousal impoverishment, which we'll discuss in a few minutes as well. As you can see, folks, Medicaid does not just look at things as they relate to the individual in need when it comes to who's responsible to pay these needed services. They look at it as a family responsibility. So let's dig a little deeper into what they mean by that. So, what does it take for Medicaid to consider you to be medically needy? Well, you must meet 3 criteria. The first is that you must belong to a group that your state has defined as a Medicaid eligible group, categorically needy or medically needy, for example. Second, you must have a medical or functional need, an impairment that limits your ability to perform activities of daily living, those ADLs, and require either institutionalized care or the level of care given in an institution, but the recipient is able to receive it in a home and or community setting. And third, your income and assets must be at or below specified levels. These levels they vary depending on which eligibility group you're in and where the long-term care is received, in the home, the community, or in a nursing facility. However, regardless of these variables, the financial requirements that apply to Medicaid coverage for long-term care services are strict and may cause many recipients to divert the bulk of their income to the cost of their care and to spend down the majority of their assets to the point of being considered impoverished. Medicaid considers this to be a process of what they call self-impoverishment. I hate the sound of that, which of course is something that most people would like to avoid usually. So, what is the process of what Medicaid calls spend down? Well, it's simply the process of depleting private or personal resources in order to become eligible for Medicaid. Thus, entering a nursing home or obtaining long-term care services by initially paying the cost out of pocket until you essentially run out of money. Then you can apply for Medicaid once you've depleted all your resources to the point of meeting the Medicaid eligibility requirements, which will place you and your spouse at the government poverty level. As you can see, folks, this is some serious stuff, and should be given deep consideration far in advance in order to avoid these circumstances as much as possible. So now let's look at clause 2 of the Medicaid spend down rules. It breaks down the bottom line when it comes to who Medicaid long-term care benefits are intended for in 3 simple sentences. The first, it's for those with low incomes. The second, it's for those who incur catastrophic medical expenditures. And the final, it's for those with minimal assets. In short, this means that to be eligible, recipients must meet 3 basic qualifications. 1, their income, both individually and the spouses as well, cannot exceed certain limits. Their medical expenses have to be beyond their ability to pay. And finally, they have to spend down their assets on their medical/long-term care needs to the point of self-impoverishment, which Medicaid clearly defines. All right, let's get a little more granular when it comes to the details related to the income and asset limits for both Medicaid applicants and their non-applicant spouses, also referred to sometimes by Medicaid as the community spouse. So these are the Medicaid long-term care income rules for the applicant spouse. This is the person who's in need of the services. You must divert the bulk of your income to the cost of your care. Secondly, in most states, your income must be at or lower than 300% of the supplemental security income, the SSI income limit, to qualify, which is bullet point 3. Bullet point 3, write that down. Get the handy dandy notebooks out. It's currently 300% of the supplemental security income, also known as SSI, income limit is $914 a month times 3, which comes to $2,742 a month. So that is the limit for income per month. If you make more than that, now this is for the applicant, you won't qualify. Third, you must contribute almost all available income toward the cost of care for Medicaid to pay the rest. Fourth, you will only be permitted to retain a nominal amount of your income each month. Check this out. You're only allowed to retain between $30 and $50. I don't know how they choose between 30 and 50. So you can see these income rules are pretty strict and don't leave much for anything or anyone else. So what types of income does Medicaid count towards eligibility? In other words, what are the types of income that must go towards paying for your medical needs? Well, it covers most types of income, as you can see. Wages, although they do allow certain deductions. Investment interest, investment income like interest and dividends from savings and investments. Social Security benefits, veterans benefits, pensions, IRA income, and rental income, just to name a few. As you can see, most income is counted for use towards your medical needs. Now, what is the income that is not counted towards eligibility? Well, when you look at these, you can pretty much understand right away why they aren't counted. The first being temporary aid to needy families, and the program that replaced aid to families with dependent children. Second, supplementary security income. Third is food stamps. Fourth is low-income home energy assistance programs, benefits. That's a program that helps pay the heating and cooling bills for low-income and elderly people. Foster care payments, certain housing or utility subsidies. So, as you can see, if they did count this income, they would pretty much be adding insult to injury. So, I don't think that it's any surprise here with this type of income not being included. So, they were the income rules for the applicant spouse, Now let's look at the rules, the income rules for the non-applicant spouse. First, federal law permits the community spouse, also known as the non-applicant spouse, to maintain a higher income for support, which is called a minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance, also known as the MMMNA. Number 2, bullet point 4. Write it down, bullet point 4. In 2023, community spouses can keep at least $2,289 in monthly income, or as much as a maximum of $3,715.50 at the state's option, essentially between 200 and 300% of the federal poverty level. Now, third, any income the community spouse receives in their own name, so this is good news, like their Social Security, pensions, or dividend income, for example, may be retained fully by the community spouse. So it doesn't actually count towards the income limits. Finally, no portion of the community spouse's own income is required to be assigned to the Medicaid or diverted to cover the cost of care for the institutionalized or applicant spouse. So that covers all the income rules for both the applicant and non-applicant spouse. Now let's look at the details related to both of them as it pertains to their assets. This is much different. Here are the rules for Medicaid's long-term care spend down on assets. First, all money and property that can be valued and turned into cash is a countable asset unless it is specifically exempt. We'll mention what's exempt. If the value of total countable assets exceeds the Medicaid eligibility limit, the applicant must spend down these assets to the limit before Medicaid assistance is available. Now, third, certain allowances are made for married couples that enable a community spouse to retain countable assets up to a certain limit. And we'll discuss that, those limits in a minute. So, what exactly is Medicaid's asset/resource requirement or limit for the applicant spouse? Well, brace yourself for this one because it is bare bones. They are not permitted to have any more than $2,000, exact words here, or $3,000 in countable assets to be eligible for assistance. Now, I'm still trying to figure out whether it's 2,000 or 3,000 actually, and how they determine which it is. But either way, it's like splitting hairs when someone gets down that low in assets, and with an allowable income limit of only $30 to $50 a month. I don't think that these assets will be lasting very long anyway. So, here are what Medicaid considers countable or non-exempt assets. Again, meaning that these types of assets must be used to spend down on an applicant's medical needs. Also, there seems to be no surprises on this list either. Cash is number one. Checking and savings accounts, number two. Certificates of deposit and money market accounts. Stock, mutual funds, bonds, and other investment holdings. IRAs, 401ks, KIOs, and other retirement funds. All retirement funds. And non-resident property. Any property that's owned that you don't live in or that your family doesn't live in. So here are the non-countable or exempt assets. And as you can see again, they leave no stone unturned here either. First, they don't count the primary residence. So a Medicaid long-term care applicant's principal home is exempt as long as the equity value in the home is less than $500,000 or up to $750,000 at the state's option. The exempt value of the primary residence is unlimited if the applicant has certain family members living there, such as a spouse or a child or children under age 21, or a blind or permanently disabled child. You also get to keep one car of any value is exempt if it's used by a household member. And then there's some household belongings, which include furniture, appliances, and similar items, exempt. Then there's some personal possessions, which include jewelry, clothing, and similar items. Now, this is where it really starts to split hair. They actually have limits on what burial contracts can be worth. So if it's irrevocable, a burial contract with a value of $5,500 or less, and for revocable contracts with a value of $1,500 or less. However, allotted values of the burial contracts are actually up to each state individually. In fact, in many states, the value of the burial contract must be reduced by the cash value of any life insurance policies. And then there's also the burial plot for the applicant and immediate family. And this includes the purchase of a prepayment of the following items: a grave site, opening and closing of a grave site, a cremation urn, casket, outer burial containers, headstones, or markers. They're all exempt. Now, cash value of life insurance is exempt as well, as long as it, get this, as long as it doesn't exceed somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 in cash value. That's an extremely small cash value life insurance, folks. So as you can see, folks, Medicaid gets pretty granular when it comes to what they count and do not count. However, I'm not too sure how they would go about getting the excess value of a burial contract from the applicant. But I'm sure they must have some way they go about it. It's just a little beyond my scope. Okay, let's talk about the spousal rules as it pertains to assets. So, community spouses can retain half or more of the couple's combined assets, subject to state and federal minimum and maximum limits. Bullet point 5. Come on, get the handy dandy notebooks out. Bullet point 5. You only got 6 bullet points, so we're getting up to the last one. Bullet point 5. Now, all states must allow the community spouse to keep all countable assets up to a certain minimum. So write that down. The community spouse can keep a minimum of $29,724. And these are the most up-to-date numbers in 2023. or up to as much as half of all the assets if they exceed the limit, but at a maximum amount of $148,620 based on 2023 rules. So if you had, like, say, for example, roughly 300,000, you're basically allowed to keep almost half of that, right? But if you say you only have 25,000, well, anything up to 29,724, they're letting you just keep it all. Once you get over that number is when they start, they'll start just giving you half of what the excess is, up to that maximum. Now, 3, a few states allow the community spouse to keep up to this full maximum amount, regardless of whether it's more than half of a couple's combined countable assets. So that's pretty nice of them. I don't think Pennsylvania is one of them, though. So, as it turns out, what Medicaid considers countable and non-countable assets when you're alive is actually different than when you're dead. That's because after you've passed away, they have something called estate recovery. And it is a process that they use to be able to recover more assets than they could when a person was alive, which means that both exempt or non-countable assets, while a recipient was living, are not necessarily protected in the future because upon their death, they reserve the right to take from the estate the amount it paid for, or they paid for the care while they were alive. Let's take a look at the rules there. So, when it comes to estate recovery, here's the rules and procedures. Recovery of assets from an estate may be made, 1, after the death of an unmarried Medicaid recipient. So if someone's not married, no spouse, no children, that's when they can start to do this. Or really, no spouse. Doesn't really say about the children. 2, after the death of the surviving spouse. So once the spouse who was not a Medicaid recipient passes, they can start to then put the estate recovery rules into play. And then when the Medicaid recipient has no surviving children under age 21, and then when the Medicaid recipient has no surviving children of any age who are blind or totally disabled. Basically, this process was created to ensure that Medicaid gets every single dollar it can get from your estate once you and your dependents are gone, which, given the cost of long-term care, is actually not really something that you can blame them for, really. However, if you're interested in leaving a legacy of any type to your children or heirs that aren't under these ages or disabled, it definitely makes sense to plan in advance to do so. All right, now that we've discussed most of the challenges when it comes to long-term care and how our state governments have incentivized us to do something about it, now let's discuss some of the solutions that I have come across that I find to be the most helpful when it comes to it. Here are the most popular types of long-term care solutions for you to consider and why. Well, the first long-term care type of solution is just really a standard long-term care policy. This is the type of policy that most people know about, where you pay X amount per year and you're guaranteed a certain benefit amount per month for a predetermined length of time. We'll look at how that plays out and the pros and cons of this type of solution in a minute, but that's the standard long-term care policy. And bullet point 6, final bullet point. Come on, get the handy dandy notebooks out. bullet point 6. All right. The next 3 are the current alternative long-term care solutions that are available today. So just write this down. These are the alternative long-term care solutions. There's 3 of them. The first, it's what's called a long-term care / life insurance hybrid policy, or just call it a long-term care life policy. The second is a long-term care / annuity policy. I'm going to explain these in a minute, but that's the second. The first is a long-term life policy, long-term care / life policy. The second is a long-term care / annuity policy. And the final is something called a Medicaid compliant annuity. So there are the 3 alternative solutions. Write them down. That's bullet point 6. Lifetime or long-term care life policy, a long-term care annuity policy, and a Medicaid compliant annuity. Now, the first, this is a combination of both long-term care coverage and life insurance. It will also allow you to pay a certain amount per year for a predetermined amount of long-term care benefits every month. But it also will allow your beneficiaries to receive a lump sum payment if you don't ever use the policy, or if you only collect from it partially. I personally think that this is attractive because many people don't like the fact that when you pay into a standard long-term care policy, if you pass away prior to using it, then your beneficiaries don't receive anything. So it seems like you wasted your money on it over many years. We'll also take a deeper look at how this works and the pros and cons of this type of solution too. The next, the long-term care / annuity insurance hybrid policy. This is a hybrid solution, long-term care solution. This one works very close to the same as the long-term care life insurance solution, except that it's usually funded using either cash or a non-qualified asset, like a brokerage account or something like that, or the sale of like a home or something that's not a retirement account. Then once the funds are in the annuity, then a long-term care rider is added to it that will provide X amount of long-term benefits over a certain period of time after the base principal assets are used up for the long-term care. This is usually used when an applicant has more substantial health issues and can't qualify for the long-term care life policy. So you basically buy an annuity that has a long-term care rider on it, and once they use up the assets that are in the annuity, then the long-term care rider kicks in and it will pay long-term care benefits tax-free over either a certain period of time, or the one I really like is one that pays it for your whole life. And then the next and final one, a Medicaid compliant annuity, which allows a Medicaid applicant to lower his or her countable assets. This is not a long-term care plan. This is for somebody who has assets that are higher than the limits and would like to convert those assets into income that has higher threshold limits. So it allows the Medicaid applicant to lower his or her countable assets down enough to meet the Medicaid's asset limit, which is between $2,000 and $3,000, unbelievably, by converting the assets into an income source that can then be used towards the Medicaid applicant, or in some cases, the non-applicant's spouse's income limit rules, which are generally much more generous than the asset limit rules are. All right, now it's let's take a look at how these solutions work and at the pros and cons for them. So, starting with the standard long-term care policy. Like I said before, you'll pay X amount per year, and you'll be guaranteed a certain benefit amount per month for a predetermined length of time. An example of that is I have a client who had these type of policies before we met, and they were paying roughly $3,000 a year each. And they had they needed to use it, they would have received right around $5,000 a month for 3 years each toward their long-term care expenses before the policies ended. However, if they had passed away before ever using the policy, it would become null and void, and they would have ended up spending the money on it just for the peace of mind that they got to enjoy while they were still alive. Now, the reason we ended up reviewing their policies is because they, out of nowhere, got a notice in the mail saying that after 8 years of paying for them, their premiums were being increased by 44% starting on their anniversary date. The wife's policy alone was currently costing about $120 a month, so it was going up to $173. Not to mention that it was likely that they were going to continue to increase that as they got older and closer to needing them. So let's look at the pros and cons for the standard long-term care policy. The pros are, one, it's very affordable at first. Two, the monthly benefit amount is definitely good compared to what the cost is. Three, they usually qualify for the state partnership programs, which is a whole different ballgame. Four, they pay for home health care, assisted care, and nursing home care, so they're pretty versatile like that. Five, the premiums can be tax deductible if you're still itemizing, which most people aren't, but sometimes they, but it only counts towards anything that's over 10% of your adjusted gross income. So benefits are non-taxable, which is great. So when you get that monthly income, there's no tax on it. The cons are the premiums are susceptible to increases indefinitely. The benefit periods are finite. You could need more, you could actually end up needing more care than they will pay, than they'll pay for, and could still end up needing the Medicaid program at some point. And if you die, you and your beneficiaries won't receive or get any of the unused premiums back, because it's mainly for you to have the peace of mind when you're alive. Next, let's look at the long-term care life insurance hybrid solutions. Now, the first aspect to them, or first element to them, is the premiums can be paid periodically or in lump sums, single premiums, but they don't have that option with standard. You can actually put a lump sum into it. Second, benefits can be either for a certain period of time, or you actually have a choice. You can have the benefit for a lifetime, depending on how it's actually set up. So you don't have that with the standard as well. It has a death benefit that will return all or a big part of the premiums you paid in to your beneficiaries tax-free. Next, the policies are usually owned jointly with the life insurance, paying out when the second insured passes away. Next, both insured then can receive benefits of the same amount for either the same period of time or for a lifetime, and even at the same time if needed. Now, as an example, recently clients of mine have committed to moving about 100,000, 150,000 of their assets over into a long-term care life policy. She is 66 and he's 65. And then they'll both be covered, or they are both covered, for $5,000 a month each for the rest of their lives, regardless of how much care they need or what type of care they need. Also, another client of mine, also age 66, chose to do it a different way. They didn't do a lump sum. They just pay a monthly amount. I believe it was $591 a month. And she too is covered for the same $5,000 a month of tax-free income to pay her long-term care costs for the rest of her life. Now, it could actually be a lower amount if you do it for, say, a certain period of time, 3 years, 5 years. You choose a finite period of time. And it's tax-free to pay her the long-term care costs for the rest of her life. Plus, if any of them were to die without using the policy, their heirs will receive a death benefit either at the invested amount or around 80% of the 80% of it tax-free based on their age. All right, so let's look at the pros and cons of this solution. The pros is the premium is a fixed amount for life, so that can be paid either monthly, quarterly, biannually, or annually, or in a single lump sum amount. Next, benefits can be either for a set period of time or for a lifetime. Next, it pays for just about all types of elder care expenses like home health care, assisted care, nursing home care, hospice, and adult daycare. Next, all or most of the premiums can be returned to beneficiaries upon death if the long-term policy is never used. Next, full benefits can be paid to both insured at the same time indefinitely if needed. And the long-term care portion of the premium is also tax deductible, again, for anything over 10% of your adjusted gross income. And all benefits are non-taxable. The cons is it costs more for life benefit plans than for plans that have a limited period of time for benefits. So if you do choose a lifetime benefit payment, it costs more for that than it does for the limited period of time for benefits. And the next is the cost for non-lifetime benefits. It costs more for non-lifetime benefits, like 3 years, 5 years, than even a standard long-term care plan does, because it provides a death benefit when the standard long-term care plan does not. Next, let's look at the long-term care / annuity insurance solution. One, the funds for this type of plan usually have to come from either cash or non-qualified assets. That's a non-retirement account. Can't be, well, usually there are some limits and rules. It can come from an IRA, but usually to get the most out of these, they have to come from either a brokerage account or some type of non-qualified asset. Which means it's generally doesn't make sense to fund this type of annuity from any type of IRAs or 401ks or retirement-based accounts. But they can be used, but no more than 1/3 of them, of any of those types of accounts, can be used because of the future RMDs that are required. Next, the long-term care rider is added to it to provide X amount of long-term care benefits over a certain period of time, or even for a lifetime. Next, underwriting is minimal due to no life insurance being involved. Finally, it is usually applied for when the applicant has more substantial health issues and can't qualify for the long-term care life policy. Now, what are the pros and cons for this? Well, the first pro is the premiums are fixed amounts, either periodically or in lump sum. Second, benefits can be paid either over a set period of time or over a lifetime. It pays for most types of elder care. Again, home health care, assisted care, nursing care, hospice, and adult daycare. Next, all or most of the premiums, again, can be returned to beneficiaries upon death if the policy is never used. And Full benefits can be paid to both insured and at the same time indefinitely if it turns out like that. And the long-term care portion of the premiums, again, is tax deductible up to 10% of the adjustable gross income. And the base benefit is tax-free if spent on long-term care expenses and that's based on the Pension Protection Act of 2006. So the actual annuity part of it, which normally if you take money from an annuity to pay for anything, you're going to be taxed at income tax levels. Because of the Pension Protection Act of 2006, they've actually exempted long-term care expenses from that. And then all the long-term care rider benefits are non-taxable. So any of the actual benefits that pay for the long-term care expenses from the long-term care rider are all just tax-free. The cons, really the one biggest con, is that it costs roughly 8 to 10% more than for the long-term care life plan would. Finally, this last solution is not a solution like I talked about, made to insure the cost of long-term care expenses directly. Rather, it's for someone who, for whatever reason, did not or could not plan in advance for them to be covered by long-term care insurance. And now is faced with needing their long-term care expenses to be paid, at least partially, by Medicaid. It was created for one to be able to avoid having to spend down the lion's share, all but $3,000, $2,000 to $3,000 of their assets in order to meet Medicaid's long-term care qualifications. So in lieu of having to do that, Medicaid has given us the option of something that's called a Medicaid compliant annuity. And I think this is fascinating, this type of solution, because it allows a Medicaid applicant to reduce some or all, depending on how much they have, of their countable assets, thus allowing them to meet Medicaid's asset limits, which is no more than $3,000. It does this by converting the assets into an income source that can then be used toward the Medicaid applicant or the non-applicant spouse's income limit rules, which are currently, like I talked about earlier, $2,382 a month for the applicant and between $2,115 to $3,216 a month for the non-applicant spouse, respectively. And as you can see, these income limits are much more generous than the asset limit rules are. And this is because most assets, even retirement assets in some states, that are actually owned separately by each spouse are considered jointly owned by Medicaid, since income is not. This is what makes this type of annuity such a great option. It converts non-exempt assets into non-countable income for a Medicaid applicant and their non-applicant spouse, giving them a set income while at the same time meeting Medicaid's asset limits, especially when you take into consideration the name on the check rule, which Medicaid uses to determine whose income source it is. So if the checks are in your non-applicant spouse's name, when it comes to Medicaid, they don't count it. So in a nutshell, here are some bullet points, and these are just major bullet points. They're not bullet points. So in a nutshell, here's just a few bullet points and pros and cons related to this particular solution. One, it can convert, these are the bullet points, it can convert Medicaid countable assets into non-countable income. It also is excluded from the Medicaid 5-year look-back rule, which is a big deal. And it must be set up to pay out the full amount of annuity over the Medicaid applicant's life expectancy, which is based on the government mortality tables that are used. And even if the non-applicant spouse is getting it, that annuity must be paid out over the applicant spouse's lifetime. And it must start paying out immediately. It can convert roughly up to $750,000 of countable assets into non-countable income, depending on the income allowed by the state for a non-applicant spouse. So it can be funded by either qualified or non-qualified assets, depending on the state's income rules for spouses. So they're the bullet points. So here's the pros and cons. The first pro, these types of solutions, they provide an opportunity to retain access to your money as income in place of using it to pay for long-term care expenses. Next, it can be used to provide income to a non-Medicaid applicant spouse up to the spousal income limit. And finally, the 5-year look-back rule was avoided for these assets. Now, they're the pros. The cons are the payout schedule must be based on the life expectancy, not for your whole life, but for your life, for the applicant spouse's life expectancy. Next, the income payments are included with Social Security, pensions, and all other income sources up to the Medicaid limits. And finally, the portion of your assets that can be protected are limited by other income sources and the Medicaid income limits. So those things all got to be looked at. Well, folks, that concludes the informational part of our workshop today. But before we jump into our 6-question quiz and our Q&A for it, I want to make a special offer to everyone that is attending. I want to offer everyone here with us a no obligation complimentary long-term care plan analysis or review. And I want to take a minute to explain a little bit about what that entails and what you can get out of it. So this is what it entails. First, there's 2 ways we can actually meet to do it. The first is online using Zoom, which is almost just like how we are doing this webinar, but instead we'll both be able to see and hear each other, and it'll be completely private. Next, we can meet in person at our office in Fort Washington, PA. It's just off the turnpike. People still do it, although much less in my business since the pandemic. Now, the second, it is a 2-step process. First, we would meet to gather all the information that I'll need to do the analysis or review. Second, we would meet a second time to go over the results of it. Finally, what you can get out of this is a clear understanding of whether it would be worth it or not for you to implement one of the long-term care plans that we discussed today. And this is how you'll find it out. So once I have all your pertinent information, I'll put it all into my retirement planning software, which looks like this. These are the actual screenshots from inside our software. I have to put it into it. Things like your name, date of birth, plan retirement year, your Social Security retirement income, pension info, investment account totals and potential returns, your projected tax rates now and later on in retirement. Then once all that is entered into the software, then we can compare various scenarios pertaining to the different long-term care plans that I showed you earlier to either your current long-term plan, if you have one, or your plan without long-term care in it, if you don't have one. Here is an example of a client of mine that went through this process. The graphs in the green are our screenshots from different scenarios that we have compared. The top graph showed their current scenario without a long-term care plan, which had an 82% chance of successfully meeting their financial obligations up until their life expectancy, which was 82 for him and 85 for her based on government mortality tables. The middle scenario is the same as above, except with a long-term care life solution like the one I showed you in it. As you can see, it took them from an 82% chance of financial success to a 100% chance for success. Now, the bottom graph is the same as the middle situation where they implemented a long-term care life plan, except that it also includes an additional 3 years each of home health care at $50,000 each a year for both of them, prior to entering a full-scale nursing facility. Now, even though it does cause their situation to slip a little, it still showed that they had a 97% chance of success in that scenario. So, as you can see, this is the situation where they'll be able to just move some assets from one type of investment to another type. And by doing so, they end up with completely different results. And they can do this because they plan things out prior to running into what could have been a catastrophic financial situation for them and their family. So, folks, this is what our long-term care plan analysis is like. This way, you could see it now, have a better understanding of what to expect from it. So, as we're doing our 6-question quiz and our Q&A session, anyone who's interested in taking us up on this offer, all you will need to do is click on the 60-minute meeting link that I will be posting in our comment box, and you can book and through doing that, you can book a no obligation complimentary long-term care review with me right on my calendar yourself. All right. So now we have all that out of the way now. Let's start our 6-question quiz and our Q&A session. All right. So I'm going to say in the Q&A section, let's put your answers. And so remember, anybody who gets the first person to get these answers correct will win a $10 gift card to the store of their choice. And do me a favor, put the store down if you win it. They'll actually get one for every single question. So if you get 3 questions right, you get a $30 gift card. So there you have it. So let's start it off. Drum roll, please. First question. When a person turns age 65, what percentage chance do they have of needing long-term care services? 70%. Good job, Patsy. Write your name. All right, number 2. How much is the current cost for a single occupant private room at a nursing home per year? $102,200. Anonymous attendee, you got to put your name down or I won't be able to contact you to give you your card. If you can, put your name in your email because I usually I send them by email. Good job, though. Third, what is the current Medicaid monthly income limit for the applicant's spouse? What is the current Medicaid monthly income limit? Income limit for the applicant's spouse. Remember, we talked about the poverty level Yeah, 2742. Good job there, Ann. Fourth, for 2023, what is the range in monthly income that Medicaid will allow the non-applicant spouse to make? The non-applicant amount, it's a range. Remember, I mentioned a range from this to that. It's around 2,200, but not exactly. Anyone else? No, 2,000 to 3,000 is the asset level that they'll allow the applicant spouse to keep, which is incredible. Can't believe that's what that's it. All right, we're gonna 25,748, 128,000. Nope, and that is that's the asset level. This is the applicant income, monthly income. Patsy was the closest at 2,200, though. It's actually between $2,289 and $3,715.50. So that's a little technical. Oh, I didn't see that. Ann actually put in 22. I'm sorry, Ann. I got to give that to Patsy. I called it already. All right. Fifth question. In 2023, when a couple's assets exceed $29,724, what is the maximum amount of assets that Medicaid will allow a non-applicant spouse to keep before they will have to pay for care? The maximum amount. Minimum amount they let you keep 100. This is assets we're talking about. Total number of assets. Remember I talked about the 300,000 and they divide it in half. It's almost half. Well, the minimum, that's close, Sam. Come on, you guys can do it. The maximum amount for the non-applicant spouse is actually closer to half of the 300,000. That's close, and it's close. They've recently increased it. Someone else want to take a stab before we give it to Ann? But she's close. All right, we're going to give it to you, Ann. It's 148,620. So you were pretty close. All right. Final question. Name one of the three alternative life long-term care solutions that are available to people today. One of the three alternative solutions that are available to people today. Alternative long-term care solutions. Long-term life. Good job, Patsy. You got it. Just want to make sure something. The person who had the 102,200, was that you, Ann? I just want to make sure I can send you a gift card. I'm only seeing anonymous attendee as the name. So, oh, that was you, Ann? That's weird. You showed up two different ways. Okay. All right, good. Then that was Ann. All right, guys. Great job. We got it. Now we're going to get into our questions. We have a few in the email. But before we go to them, if anybody has any just general questions or what have you, shoot them out, or I'll go right into the email here. All right, let's go right into the email. First question: is it cheaper to buy long-term care insurance when you're younger? Well, the obvious answer to that is yes, but very surprising. I see this a lot. It's not as cheap as you would think. And I found that it may even make more sense for people to, once they're done saving for retirement, to move over a piece of their assets and dedicate it to long-term care, because I think you get a better deal doing it that way. And it's not as much of a strain on a younger person putting money out, especially what the cost is. So I find that even though it's cheaper, it really may make more sense to do it with a lump sum later on when someone's already done saving for retirement, and allocate a certain amount of assets to that, because you get a lot of bang for your buck when you do that. All right, second question. If an applicant and non-applicant spouse have jointly owned assets, can Medicaid still make them spend them all before they'll pay for long-term care services? Well, they can make them, assets are different than income. So a non-applicant spouse can have their own income sources like Social Security, wages, investment income, all kinds of things coming in the form of income that don't count at all towards the income limits. But any assets they own, regardless of whether they're IRAs or, or taxable accounts at a brokerage or bank accounts, whatever, even if they're just in their name, all count towards the assets. So the asset limits are between $29,007, well, really between $0 or $1 and $148,620, but they'll let you keep up to 100% of $29,724. And that's all assets, both non-applicant and applicant spouses' assets combined. Now, next question: are there any assets that the non-applicant spouse can own separate from the applicant spouse? And the answer is plain and simple: no. But they can keep, again, between that $29,000, $1 and up to $29,000, 100% of, and up to $148,620 of their combined assets. Final question: how much income can a non-applicant spouse have in their name that's separate from the applicant spouse? And the answer to that is it's unlimited. You can actually have unlimited amount of income that's just in your name that won't have to go towards any of the applicant spouse's long-term care expenses. But the assets, all of them count. All right. So that we got that out of the way. We did pretty good today. It's only 19 minutes after. All right. So there are the sources that we use. I'm going to put them in the comment box as well once we're done. Rachel usually does it. I can't coordinate both of them at the same time. But I'm going to leave this open for a half hour after the comment boxes, and also you can go in and you can click the links or whatever you want to do. They'll be accessible to you still. All right, folks, that concludes our workshop for today. I just want to thank everyone who attended for being the type of people that care enough about themselves and their family to spend their precious time learning about important topics like this. I truly commend you for that. All right. On behalf of myself, Brian Dougherty of PLC Financial Solutions, located in the Fort Washington, PA area, I want to remind you that if there's anything we've discussed tonight, or anything else for that matter, that you would like to discuss further with us, you can reach out to us at either 215-804-9708 by phone or at info@plcfs.com or by email, that is, or to make it even easier, just go to our website at plcfs.com and all our information is always there. Also, please mark Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. I can't believe it. We're there already, folks, right at the cusp of it. At 7 p.m. on your calendar for our next webinar, we'll be announcing the topic at some point during the month. Remember, we usually do our webinars on the last Tuesday of every month, except this one due to the holidays. So with all that said, folks, have a great Christmas and New Year's or whatever holidays that you celebrate, and a great January 2024 as well. And we will see you next month. Good night, folks.